Thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Jordan and I talk about royal history, mostly royal women, here on this channel. And if that is something that you enjoy, please consider sticking around and listening to me talk about the Grand Duchess Anastasia, who was the youngest daughter of the last Tsar of Russia. Thank you so much again for clicking on this video, and now let's get into it. We're all familiar with the auburn-haired beauty drawn up by 20th Century Fox, the orphaned girl rescued by a young boy at the height of an attack on her family's palace. The animated movie Anastasia was released in 1997 and has since become a childhood classic for a generation of children. We grew up watching Anya slowly transform into the missing Grand Duchess. We cheered as she fell in love with Dmitri and hid our eyes when the menacing Rasputin appeared on screen in an eerie green hue. For many of us, this story was the first time we dipped our feet into the subject of history, marveling as our parents told us the true story, that there had once been a powerful Romanov family that was murdered, but the remains of the youngest daughter had never been found. As young kids, we had hoped that Anastasia would one day remember who she was, that this real princess would get the happily ever after awarded to her fictional counterpart. In 2007, the final two remains of the Romanov family, who were murdered in 1918 during the Russian Revolution, were found in a Siberian forest. The state of their bodies was consistent with the executioner's notes and were then confirmed to be the Romanovs via DNA testing. With that case closed and any chance of the Grand Duchess or any of her family members surviving their basement room assassination in the Ipatiev house, the real story becomes inherently more interesting. Who was Anastasia? What is the story behind those ghost-like characters who danced along to the iconic Once Upon a December? Anastasia was born the youngest daughter and fourth child of the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, on June 18, 1901. While her parents had been hoping for a son and heir, they did love their little Anastasia. When she was a small baby and young child, her personality was larger than the Alexandra Palace itself. She was best friends with her big sister Maria, with whom she was fondly referred to as the little pair, in contrast to her older sisters Olga and Tatiana, who were the big pair. The four were close, but so incredibly different. Unlike the introspective Olga, the dutiful Tatiana, and the loving Maria, Anastasia was referred to as Shivsik. I have been practicing that pronunciation for a very long time, and unfortunately that is the best I can do. It's a German word meaning little mischief. They called Anastasia that because she was, of course, full of mischief. English is my first and only language, and I think that comes through when I try to pronounce words like this. So I apologize for that. I tried my best. So back to Anastasia. She did the same needlework, the same chores, and same academics as her three sisters, but she desired something far more fun than listening to tutors' lectures for hours. Anastasia had a knack for comedy and often performed little skits with her sisters. She not only thrived on making people laugh, she excelled at the art. Helen Azar notes in her short biography of the fourth Grand Duchess, which was found on her website, that, quote, "Some remarked that Anastasia was destined for the stage," end quote. It was noted that Anastasia could, quote, even as a baby, entertain grave old men who were her neighbors at the table with her astonishing remarks, end quote. Even in the darkest of times for her family, following her father's abdication and their arrest amidst a countrywide revolution, she managed to draw laughter from her loved ones, the sound surely echoing off the walls of their prison house in Ekaterinburg, for the Bolshevik guards to hear, end quote. Her personality, though fun-loving and entertaining, was not always charming to the people around her. As a small child, she was known to be a bit of a brat, her will too strong to be held back by her English nannies. She would climb trees and hide away in cupboards and refuse orders. She was a master at pranks and naughtiness, the blue-eyed, strawberry blonde-haired little girl dissolving into fits of giggles as she tripped servants and her siblings. She was not always the ideal playmate either with other children. It was even noted by one of her cousins that she was nasty to the point of being evil. Anna Vyrubova, a lady-in-waiting and a close friend of Alexandra, notes an instance in her memoirs where Anastasia played a bit too rough with her sisters. The four had been having a snowball fight in the yards of their Polish palace when Anastasia knocked Tatiana to the ground with a snowball full of rocks. When their little brother, the Tsarevich Alexei, was born, the family and country rejoiced. Russia remained one of the only monarchies at the time to refuse women the throne. Because of the law that had been put into place by the son of Catherine the Great, the fact that Tsar Nicholas already had 4 daughters meant little to nothing for the Romanov line of succession. The birth of a little boy in 1904 meant that the Tsarina had fulfilled her duties as empress and that the 4 sisters had a little one to dote on. When it was discovered that their baby brother was sick, that he had the dreaded hemophilia, the 4 young girls became even more protective of the boy. They kept a close eye on him, calling him baby and sitting by his bedside when he was sick and writing letters when they were not permitted to visit. Despite his illness, which often left him bedridden, Alexei was a vivacious and curious boy, and who better to be his partner in crime? His big sister Anastasia. The two of them were incredibly close, and the absolute best of friends. Together they no doubt ran their governesses ragged. As Anastasia aged into the 17-year-old that she would forever be frozen as, she mellowed out some. She still enjoyed making people laugh and still pushed the boundaries of what was allowed. For example, during the family's time under house arrest, Anastasia was nearly shot for peering out a window and then stuck her tongue out at the guard who had fired at her. Anastasia went from playing silly pranks and sticking pins on the chairs of her tutors to becoming the relief her family desperately needed. One can hardly imagine what it must have been like for the teenage girl locked up with her future in constant danger. She and her family had no clue what awaited them. They did not know if they'd ever be allowed outside for more than an hour under guard ever again. They had no clue if they'd be allowed to see their friends, or to dance, paint, sing, or any of the other number of activities they'd so loved prior to the Russian Revolution. Anastasia, determined to maintain her status as the joy of the family, must have felt an enormous weight on her small shoulders. How was she to make her father, who had lost his kingdom, laugh? Her eldest sister Olga, who was becoming thinner and more depressed with each passing day, how was she to bring a smile back to her face? Her brother, who was in agonizing pain, her mother, who was suffering from her own ailments, could she make things better for them? We will never know if Anastasia was able to accomplish these goals, but we can hope. We can hope for this Anastasia, the real girl with messy hair and skinned knees, who lost her life before it had truly begun, just as we had hoped for the animated princess of our adolescence. Anastasia was born into a world that was already crumbling around her. She was born into the Romanov dynasty that had ruled Russia since 1613. And while they had for centuries known great power and success, those days were long gone. The Russian people were becoming more and more disillusioned with not only Anastasia's father Nicholas, but with the monarchy itself. Western Europe had already started moving away from monarchies with significant power, and Russia was keen to catch up. The Russian people were starving in the streets, reeling from the cost of wars that Nicholas had decided to join in Japan and then World War I, while watching the royals and autocrats live lives of extreme grandeur. The Russian people had tried appealing to the Tsar. They'd advocated for more representation, but it just wasn't happening. An imperial dynasty does not pair well with a representative body. While Anastasia and her sisters knew that they, as royalty, could be in danger, they'd had family members assassinated after all. It is unknown if they knew how bad things had gotten. It could be argued that Olga and Tatiana, the older of the girls, knew a bit more, but Anastasia, who was still just a teenager at the time of her death, may not have been as aware. Even if she was completely oblivious to the nationwide issues, she knew very well of the more personal issues plaguing her family. Her little brother was sick with hemophilia, and the sisters found themselves in almost constant distress. The devout girls were on their knees in prayer every time the baby of the family found himself in pain. Anastasia's parents had taken to following the teachings of Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian peasant who had claimed to be a holy man in order to save Alexei. There was no cure for hemophilia at the time, and medicine seemed to constantly fail the boy. Religion was their last resort. And there was something about Rasputin that calmed Alexei, which in turn calmed the worrying family. This devotion to Rasputin alienated Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children from the extended Romanov family, which only made the family an even closer, almost codependent unit. Even when things were worsening and a possibility for the girls to escape Russia potentially presented itself, the family opted to stick together. In the summer of 1918, the Romanovs, who had for months been held prisoner in Ekaterinburg, were awoken in the night and told that an army of revolutionaries were nearby, meaning that the family had to be moved to safety. They gathered what little of their belongings they were allowed, including family jewels that had been sewn into the bodices of the girls' clothes, and made their way to the basement of the Ipatiev house, the home they had been held prisoner in. Once standing in the basement, a death order was read aloud and bullets began bouncing off the walls. What followed was a brutal execution of the Romanov family and their few companions. The 4 girls undoubtedly suffered the most, the jewels protecting them from the gunfire. They watched as their parents were murdered and cried helplessly for escape. The executioners had to leave the room due to the smoke coming from the gunfire, but when they came back, they found the girls still alive. They used their bayonets to beat them and delivered shots to the head. Reports also state that one or both of the younger 2 girls, Maria or Anastasia, which one or both we will never know for sure, may have sat up and screamed as their bodies were carried from the house. They were then killed. Anastasia was a fighter until the very end. She was full of life. She was a girl just on the cusp of womanhood who would never get to experience the world, but who would have no doubt tackled it with a ferocity that would have shocked the other royals around her, I'm sure of it. I may not be a monarchist, and I certainly believe that Nicholas was a bad leader, but I will always find myself heartbroken thinking about the Romanov children. As a student of history, I understand why those opposed to imperial rule felt that they needed to remove the children as well. Romanov heirs with any claim to the throne would have been a threat and given royalists something to fight for. I also find myself frustrated because of the hypocrisy. Were the girls important to the Russian throne or not? Alexandra had to get pregnant again and again because a daughter could not inherit the throne. I firmly believe that Olga would have made a wonderful leader if given the chance, but they had needed a boy. But then, 2 decades later, the girls are so important that they had to be bludgeoned to death next to the dead bodies of their parents? Time and time again, women are both not considered as good or important as men, but also significant enough that they must be killed. It's impossible to know what Anastasia would have gone on to be. Perhaps she would have gone on to live somewhere in Europe. She could have settled down and raised her own family, or perhaps worked in public service like many of her other royal cousins who had found themselves without a throne. Either way, I'm sure she would have made those around her smile. Anastasia will forever remain a 17-year-old child, and she will always be far more interesting than anything a Hollywood studio could have written up. Thank you so much for clicking on this video and for sticking around for this whole thing. I know that 13 minutes, it's a long time, and if you manage to stick around for the whole video, please consider leaving a comment or liking, subscribing if you really like to hear about royal history. I make videos about royal history, royal women. I would absolutely love to have you join me along for this journey of making YouTube videos. I'm still very new. But yeah, thank you so much again for clicking. I had a lot of fun making this video. I have fun making all of my videos, researching these topics. I absolutely love reading about these subjects. So thank you again, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.